The air in the old, grand house always felt thick with unspoken things. Not dust or the scent of aged wood, but something heavier, like a secret held too close for too long. For Michael, it was the backdrop to what he believed was his perfect life. He'd met Sarah almost a year ago, a whirlwind romance that had swept him off his feet, leaving him dizzy with an intoxicating blend of passion and profound connection. She was everything he'd ever dreamed of. Brilliant, beautiful, with a laugh that could make the gloomiest day feel sun-kissed. Her eyes, a startling shade of emerald green, held a depth that simultaneously fascinated and, at times, unnerved him. They were the kind of eyes that seemed to know more than they let on, twinkling with an inner light one moment, then clouding with an inexplicable shadow the next. Their courtship had been swift, intense. Michael, a successful architect in his late 30s, had always been methodical, precise, a man who built his life with carefully measured steps. But Sarah had been an earthquake, shifting his foundations, forcing him to abandon his blueprints and simply surrender to the chaotic beauty of their connection. He remembered their first meeting at an art gallery opening, her standing before a canvas of swirling, vibrant colors, just as captivating as the artwork itself. He'd approached her, a rare impulse for him, and within minutes, they were lost in conversation, hours melting away like ice in summer. By the end of the night, he felt a pull towards her he'd never experienced, an almost magnetic force that promised a future he hadn't dared to imagine. Their dates were a blur of shared laughter, deep conversations about art, philosophy, and the hidden corners of their souls. Sarah was a paradox, fiercely independent, yet tenderly affectionate. She loved classical music and wild motorcycle rides, quiet evenings reading by the fireplace and spontaneous trips to obscure towns. Michael adored her unpredictability, the way she kept him on his toes, always surprising him. He found himself utterly consumed, thinking of her constantly, every waking moment punctuated by thoughts of her smile, her touch, the quiet comfort of her presence. It wasn't just love. It was an obsession, a profound, almost spiritual bond that transcended anything he'd ever known. He was a man utterly, completely, irrevocably in love. Yet, amidst this intoxicating bliss, there were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible shifts that, in hindsight, felt like tiny cracks in a perfect facade. Sometimes, he'd arrive at her quaint little cottage, nestled deep within a thicket of ancient oak trees, and she would seem different. Not just a mood swing, but something more fundamental. Her emerald eyes, usually sparkling, might appear dulled, almost opaque. Her laugh, so often clear and melodious, would sometimes take on a slightly hollow edge. Her movements, usually graceful and fluid, could occasionally seem stiff, almost hesitant. He'd chalk it up to a long day at work, or perhaps a touch of fatigue. "Are you all right, darling?" he'd ask, his brow furrowed with concern. She would simply smile, that captivating, enigmatic smile, and reassure him. "Just a little tired, my love. Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix." And just as quickly, the fleeting strangeness would vanish, replaced by the familiar, vibrant Sarah he adored. He dismissed these moments as figments of his overactive imagination, a byproduct of being so deeply in love that he was perhaps looking for flaws where none existed. One evening, he called her, wanting to tell her about a breakthrough at work, a new design concept he was particularly proud of. The phone rang for a long time, then went to voicemail. He left a message, a playful one, promising to tell her all about it later. An hour later, his phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Hey," she said, her voice sounding a little distant, muffled, as if she were in a tunnel. "Sorry, I was just out running errands." "What's up?" Michael frowned. He'd heard her voice clear as a bell on the voicemail message just an hour before. A distinctly cheerful hello. "You've reached Sarah?" The subtle difference in her voice on the call, the slightly altered cadence, nagged at him. He pushed it aside. Probably just a bad signal. Then there was the incident with the scar. Sarah had a small, almost invisible scar just above her left eyebrow. A faint silvery line that she told him was from a childhood bicycle accident. He gently traced it with his finger countless times. A tender, intimate gesture. One lazy Sunday morning, as they lay tangled in bed, sunlight streaming through the window, he reached for her, his fingers instinctively going to that familiar spot. But it wasn't there. He blinked, confused, then looked closer. No scar. His breath hitched. Before he could say anything, she stirred, opening her eyes. "What is it?" she murmured, her voice laced with sleep. He hesitated, his mind scrambling for an explanation. Had he imagined it? Was he so sleep-addled that his memory was playing tricks on him? He shook his head, forcing a smile. "Nothing, my love. Just admiring you." She smiled back, a slow, sensual stretch, and the moment passed, swallowed by the morning light. He told himself he must have been mistaken, that the light was just hitting her face in a weird way, making the faint scar invisible. He tried to forget it, but the image of her unblemished skin lingered, a silent, unsettling question mark in the back of his mind. These tiny anomalies, these inexplicable blips in their perfect reality, began to accumulate, like grains of sand eventually forming a dune. Each one on its own was easy to dismiss. Together, they started to form a pattern, a quiet, insistent hum beneath the surface of his contentment. He loved her fiercely, truly, and he told himself that love was about acceptance, about overlooking minor quirks. But these weren't quirks. These were shifts subtle yet profound, that defied logic. He began to feel a faint, gnawing sense of unease, a cold tendril of doubt creeping into the warmth of his affection. It was like living in a beautiful dream, but occasionally, for just a split second, the scenery would flicker, revealing something else beneath. One particularly memorable evening, they were at his favorite Italian restaurant, a cozy place with checkered tablecloths and the scent of garlic and basil wafting through the air. Sarah, usually an adventurous eater, insisted on ordering the same dish she always did, the rigatoni bolognese. Nothing unusual there, except for her reaction when the waiter, a friendly man who knew Michael well, brought their food. He placed Michael's lasagna down, then turned to Sarah. "And for you, Sarah, the penne arrabbiata, just like you always have it." Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Her eyes widened, a flicker of something akin to panic crossing her face before she quickly composed herself. "Oh," she said, forcing a laugh. "No, I actually ordered the bolognese tonight. I guess I'm just in a different mood." The waiter looked momentarily confused, then shrugged apologetically. "My mistake, ma'am. I'll get that corrected right away." Michael watched the exchange, a strange tension coiling in his gut. Sarah had never ordered the penne arrabbiata. It was always the bolognese. He remembered clearly. He'd even teased her about her consistent choice. Why would the waiter, who seemed to remember her perfectly, make such a specific mistake? And why had Sarah looked so startled? He didn't press the issue, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. But the incident gnawed at him. He found himself replaying it in his mind, trying to find a logical explanation. Was it possible she had, at some point, ordered something else and he'd forgotten? No, he was sure. He remembered their first date there, her declaring her undying love for their bolognese. He tried to push it away, to focus on the delicious food and Sarah's animated conversation about an upcoming art exhibition. But the subtle discord had been struck, a tiny, almost inaudible note in the symphony of their perfect relationship. The sense of a deeper, unsettling reality, just beneath the surface of their idyllic life, was growing stronger. It was like a constant hum, a vibration that only Michael seemed to pick up. He would watch Sarah, truly watch her, searching for these minute discrepancies. Sometimes her answers to his questions about her past, about her family, felt just a little too polished, a little too rehearsed. He knew she had an estranged relationship with her family, a painful past she rarely spoke of, and he respected her privacy. But there was a new kind of guardedness, a subtle evasion that felt different from mere reluctance to revisit old wounds. It was as if she was protecting a secret, not from him, but from the world, and he, unwittingly, was stumbling upon the fringes of it. He tried to talk to her about it gently, subtly. "Is everything all right, my love?" he'd ask, reaching for her hand across the dinner table. "You seem a little preoccupied sometimes." She would simply squeeze his hand, her eyes soft, and assure him, "Of course, everything's wonderful with you, Michael. Just work worries, you know how it is." And he would let it go, because her touch was so warm, her smile so reassuring, that it was easy to believe her. It was easy to drown out the whispers of doubt with the comforting melody of her presence. But the whispers were getting louder, more insistent, threatening to shatter the fragile peace he had so desperately clung to. He was falling deeper into a labyrinth he didn't even know existed, and the woman he loved, the woman he planned to spend the rest of his life with, seemed to hold the first, most baffling clue. He had no idea just how profound that clue was, or how utterly it would devastate his world. The truth, when it finally revealed itself, would be far more insidious than any fleeting anomaly or forgotten scar. The unease within Michael grew, not as an explosive fear, but as a persistent whisper, a coldness slowly creeping into the warm moments he shared with Sarah. He tried to rationalize everything. Work pressure, fatigue, or perhaps he was just too in love and overly suspicious. But these anomalies kept repeating, like discordant notes in a perfect symphony. He began to log them, first in his mind, then, gradually, he found himself scribbling cryptic notes in a small notebook he kept hidden. One day Sarah would suddenly love a type of tea she'd never touched before. Another day, she'd abruptly recall a childhood story she'd previously claimed never existed. These tiny details, insignificant on their own, when pieced together, painted a disturbing picture of a woman who changed, but not in the way ordinary people do. Phone calls also became a point of suspicion. Sarah often wouldn't answer his calls immediately. When she called back, her voice sometimes sounded different, not in a sick or tired way, but a distinctly altered tone and timbre. Michael subconsciously tried to register these instances, comparing her voice on the phone to her voice in person. He noticed a subtle but discernible difference. He told himself it was probably just a bad connection, or the way voices sound different over the phone compared to direct conversation. But deep down, a rational part of him refused to accept that explanation. He began to ask himself a question he had never dared to consider. Was he dating someone he didn't truly know? One particularly rainy afternoon, Michael happened to stop by the flower shop near Sarah's house to buy her a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite. He saw her standing outside, talking to an older woman he'd never met. He was about to walk over and greet them, but then he paused. Sarah was laughing, a bright, utterly carefree sound. The strange thing was, the older woman called her Catherine. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He knew Sarah had a close friend named Catherine, but that woman had fiery red hair and a completely different style. He stood frozen, hidden behind a large tree, his heart pounding. He heard the older woman ask Catherine about her mother's health. Sarah, or Catherine, replied cheerfully, saying her mother was doing very well and she had just visited her last week. But his Sarah had told him her mother had passed away years ago. Michael felt his head spin. He didn't dare to step out. He stood there until Sarah, or Catherine, said goodbye to the woman and walked into the flower shop. He waited a few more minutes, trying to compose himself before entering. Sarah was choosing flowers, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders. She turned, her familiar emerald eyes sparkling when she saw him. "Michael, you surprised me." She smiled, the smile he adored. He tried to keep his voice normal. "Just stopped by to get you some flowers. I saw you talking to someone outside just now." Sarah hesitated slightly, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face before she quickly composed herself. "Oh, just an old friend. She keeps mistaking me for my twin sister, Catherine. It happens all the time." "Twin sister?" Michael asked, feeling something cold tighten in his chest. He had never heard Sarah mention having a twin sister. She had always said she was an only child, and her family relationships were so complicated she didn't want to talk about them. Sarah nodded, forcing a strained smile. "Yes, I have a twin sister. We're not very close. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, Michael. It's just a long and painful story. I didn't want to worry you." She pulled him close, resting her head on his shoulder, her voice soft, full of remorse. He hugged her, a mix of relief and profound suspicion swirling within him. Her having a twin sister could explain those strange moments. But why had she hidden it from him? And why was that woman so certain when calling her Catherine? He tried to accept the explanation, to soothe the rising fears within him. After all, everyone had their secrets, their pains they didn't want to share. But the image of Sarah laughing and talking cheerfully with the older woman, being called Catherine, and the lie about her mother being alive, haunted him. It created a cold void in the wall of trust he had built for their relationship. For the next few days, Michael couldn't shake it off. He found himself studying Sarah more intently, searching for clues, for any sign that the woman before him was truly his Sarah, and not some clever impersonation. Every glance, every word, every gesture was now scrutinized through a lens of suspicion. He felt like a detective in his own life, piecing together fragments of a puzzle he desperately hoped wasn't as dark as it seemed. He tried to bring up the topic of her twin, Catherine, subtly, casually. "So, about your sister," he'd begin, trying to sound nonchalant. Sarah would always change the subject, or give vague answers that led nowhere. "Oh, Catherine's just busy. You know how it is." Or, "She prefers to keep to herself." Her reluctance only fueled Michael's growing unease. One evening, Sarah mentioned she had to go out of town for a few days for a work conference. Michael offered to drive her to the airport, but she insisted on taking a taxi. "It's early, love. No need to inconvenience you," she said, giving him a quick kiss. He watched her taxi drive away, a strange mix of relief and anxiety washing over him. Relief because maybe a few days apart would clear his head, and anxiety because the thought of her leaving, even temporarily, felt wrong somehow. That night, alone in his apartment, Michael found himself staring at the wall, the silence around him amplifying the chaotic whispers in his mind. He remembered something else Sarah had told him early in their relationship. She used to volunteer at a local animal shelter every Tuesday evening. He knew it was Tuesday, and with her out of town, the shelter would be the last place she'd be. A sudden, irrational urge seized him. He had to know. He had to see if his lingering doubts were just a product of his imagination, or if something truly sinister was at play. He grabbed his car keys, his heart pounding in his chest, and drove towards the animal shelter, a place he hadn't visited with Sarah in months. The rain had started again, a steady, relentless downpour, mirroring the storm brewing within him. He parked down the street, hoping to avoid being seen, and watched the shelter entrance. The lights were on inside. He waited, his breath shallow, for what felt like an eternity. And then he saw her, through the large glass window, standing among the cages of barking dogs and meowing cats, was Sarah. Or rather, a woman who was the spitting image of Sarah. She was laughing, playing with a small terrier, her golden hair tied back in a messy bun. But something was off. This Sarah was wearing a bright yellow t-shirt, not the elegant, muted tones his Sarah preferred. And then, he noticed a thin, almost invisible scar just above her left eyebrow. The scar. The one that sometimes appeared, sometimes didn't. The one his Sarah claimed was from a childhood accident, but which he had so recently seen absent. A cold dread enveloped him, a sickening realization that clawed at his throat. This wasn't his Sarah. This was Catherine. His mind reeled. If this was Catherine and she was here, then where was his Sarah? The perfect world he had so meticulously built was crumbling around him, revealing a horrifying deception that went far deeper than he could have ever imagined. He felt a chilling certainty, a terrifying understanding that he was caught in a web of lies so intricate, so meticulously crafted, that it threatened to consume him whole. He had thought he was dating the woman of his dreams, but the truth was beginning to emerge, a truth far more sinister than a simple case of mistaken identity. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. The rain intensified, blurring the world outside, but it couldn't wash away the clarity of the terrifying revelation that had just struck him. The rain continued to fall, but Michael barely noticed. His world had shrunk to the horrifying scene unfolding before him. Catherine, unequivocally Catherine, laughing and interacting with the animals, completely unaware of his presence. The scar, the bright yellow shirt, the distinct shift in her demeanor. It all screamed deception. His mind, usually so orderly and logical, was a whirlwind of betrayal and confusion. If Catherine was here, pretending to be Sarah, where was the real Sarah? And why? A chilling possibility, one he desperately tried to push away, began to form. Was the Sarah he loved even real? Or had he been living a meticulously constructed lie, orchestrated by these two identical women? He drove home in a daze, the wipers on his car doing little to clear the blurring vision through the windshield. His own eyes clouded with a dawning despair. Every memory, every shared laugh, every intimate moment with Sarah now felt tainted, scrutinized under this new, terrifying light. He replayed every strange incident. The restaurant order, the missing scar, the altered voice on the phone. They weren't quirks. They were pieces of a puzzle designed to fool him. A cold rage began to simmer beneath his shock. How could someone he loved so deeply, trusted implicitly, betray him in such a profound, calculated way? He spent the night pacing, unable to sleep. The ornate, antique furniture in his grand house, once a symbol of his settled, successful life, now felt like silent, mocking witnesses to his torment. He needed answers, and he needed them now. There was only one place to get them. He waited until dawn, the first pale light bleeding through the curtains, before making the call. He dialed Sarah's number, his finger trembling. It rang once, twice, then a familiar voice, her voice, answered, sounding groggy. "Hello," Sarah murmured. "Sarah." Michael's voice was strained, hoarse. "You're supposed to be at a conference out of town." There was a beat of silence on the other end, a subtle shift in her breath. "Michael? What are you talking about? I'm at the hotel. I told you I had an early flight this morning." "Don't lie to me, Sarah." Michael bit out, the anger finally breaking through his controlled facade. "I saw you last night, at the animal shelter. You were there playing with the dogs. And that woman, she called you Catherine." Another pause, longer this time, then a sharp intake of breath. "Michael, listen, I can explain. It's not what you think." Her voice was suddenly alert, losing its sleepy edge. "Explain what, Sarah? Explain why the woman I love is secretly a twin I never knew about. Explain why you lied about your mother, about your past, about who you are. Explain why you've been letting someone else pretend to be you. What kind of twisted game is this?" He was shouting now, his voice echoing in the vast, empty rooms. "Please, Michael, calm down. Let me come over. I'll tell you everything face to face." Her voice was pleading, a tremor in it that might have once softened his resolve, but now only fueled his fury. "No," he snarled. "You come here, right now. I'm waiting." He hung up, his hands still shaking. The next hour was an agonizing blur. He walked through his house, touching things, trying to anchor himself in a reality that felt like it was slipping away. Every photograph of them, every gift she had given him, every piece of clothing she had left behind, they all seemed to mock him, symbols of a love that was a meticulously constructed illusion. Finally, a knock at the door. He threw it open. Standing there was Sarah. His Sarah. Or was she? Her emerald eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and something he couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps regret, perhaps calculation. Her golden hair was slightly disheveled, as if she had rushed. She wore a simple dark blue dress, a stark contrast to the bright yellow t-shirt he'd seen at the shelter. "Michael," she began, her voice soft, tentative. Don't even try to pretend." He cut her off, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. "Tell me, everything. Who are you? Who is Catherine? And what have you both done?" She flinched, then took a deep breath. She looked away, her gaze fixed on a distant point beyond him, as if gathering courage from the empty space. "My name is Sarah, and Catherine, she's my twin sister. We were born identical. Our parents, they were extremely religious, and they believed that one twin was a blessing, the other a curse." Her voice was a monotone, flat, as if reciting a painful, well-rehearsed script. Michael scoffed. A curse? What kind of twisted belief is that? They separated us at birth, she continued, ignoring his interruption, her eyes still distant. Catherine was kept with them, raised as their blessing. I was sent away to live with an aunt in a different state. I grew up believing I was an only child, and that my parents had died when I was very young. My aunt told me just enough to keep me from asking questions. It was a lonely childhood, Michael, always feeling like a piece of me was missing. But the lies about your mother, he pressed, his voice sharp with accusation. My adoptive mother, my aunt, she died years ago. My biological mother, I only reconnected with her a few years ago. She was riddled with guilt, wanted to make amends. She told me everything, about Catherine, about the separation. Sarah's voice cracked slightly, a hint of genuine pain. Catherine and I, we started meeting in secret. First, it was just curiosity. We looked exactly alike, but our lives, our personalities were so different. She was always the wild one, the impulsive one. I was always more guarded. Michael's mind was racing. It explained so much. The scar that appeared and disappeared, the changes in personality, the conflicting stories. But it didn't explain the why. Why did you do this, Sarah? Why involve me in this elaborate charade? Sarah finally met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with tears. Catherine, she always envied my life. She was always stifled by our parents' strictness, their expectations. She wanted to escape, to experience freedom. And she saw how happy I was with you, how I had built this wonderful life. She begged me, Michael, she begged me to let her experience just a glimpse of it, just for a little while. She promised it wouldn't go further than a few harmless outings, a few calls, just to feel what it was like to be me, to be loved by someone like you. You let her pretend to be you? Michael's voice was disbelieving, horrified. You let her deceive me? For a glimpse of freedom? It started innocently, Sarah pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. A few times when I was busy or sick, she'd answer my phone, pretend to be me. She's an incredible mimic. Then she started insisting on meeting you just once or twice, at places she knew I wouldn't be. She said she just wanted to see what it was like. I was scared, Michael, but I felt sorry for her. She lived such a constrained life. I never imagined it would go this far. Her voice was barely a whisper now, broken by sobs. But then, she started pushing for more, for longer periods. She threatened to expose everything if I didn't comply, to tell you the truth herself, but twisted into something even uglier, to make me look like the manipulator. Michael stared at her, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with a horrifying click. The woman at the restaurant who ordered the penne arrabbiata, that was Catherine. The voice on the phone that sounded different, Catherine. The times the scar wasn't there, Catherine. The constant changes in personality he'd dismissed as quirks, that was the switch. He had been dating two different women, believing them to be one. The betrayal was staggering, a punch to the gut that left him breathless. So, which one of you am I talking to right now? He asked, his voice low, dangerous. Sarah flinched again. It's me, Michael. It's always been me when it truly mattered. When we were here, at your home, when we shared our deepest secrets. But she enjoyed it too much. She started to crave your affection, your attention. She became obsessed with the life I had with you. Obsessed. Michael scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping him. And you just let her? You let her play with my feelings, with my life. I tried to stop her, Michael, I swear. Sarah cried, reaching for his hand. He recoiled. She became unpredictable, dangerous. She knew so much about my life, about our relationship. She said she'd ruin everything, tell everyone lies about me, make sure I lost everything if I didn't keep quiet. She even threatened. She threatened you. Her voice broke, her eyes wide with genuine terror. Michael's blood ran cold. Threatened him? This wasn't just a harmless game anymore. This was a calculated, insidious plot. Where is she now? He demanded, his voice laced with a new kind of fear, not for himself, but for the woman he had loved, who now stood before him, broken and terrified. Sarah shook her head, tears still falling. "I don't know, Michael. She was supposed to be at the conference. She must have known I would confess if I had the chance. She must have known you'd find out. She's always one step ahead. Always." Her voice trailed off, a chilling premonition hanging in the air. The truth, finally revealed, was a monstrous, two-faced entity, and Michael realized with a sickening lurch that he was caught squarely in its jaws. The woman he loved was both a victim and an accomplice, and the woman who had haunted his periphery was a dangerous, jealous shadow, now potentially unleashed. The revelation hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of dread that pressed down on Michael. He stared at Sarah, the woman he thought he knew, now fractured into two horrifying realities. The terror in her eyes seemed genuine, yet the depth of her complicity was a chasm he couldn't bridge. Threatened him? This wasn't just a sick game. It was a malicious, calculated manipulation that had stolen his identity, his emotions, his very sense of reality. "She threatened me?" Michael's voice was barely a whisper, laced with disbelief. "What exactly did she threaten?" Sarah stumbled back, covering her mouth with a trembling hand, tears still streaming down her face. She said she knew everything about your life too. Your family, your work, your vulnerabilities. She said if I didn't cooperate, she would ruin you. Make it look like you were the one unstable, the one playing games. She's brilliant, Michael, in a terrifying way. She can mimic voices, mannerisms, even handwriting. She studied everything about us. She was always watching. Her voice was a broken sob. She wanted what I had. She wanted you. A cold, hard knot formed in Michael's stomach. The thought of Catherine, this twisted doppelganger, observing his every move, dissecting his life, turning it into a script for her macabre performance, was sickening. He looked at Sarah, truly looked at her, and saw not just the victim she claimed to be, but the woman who had allowed this monstrosity to flourish. Her fear was real, but so was her betrayal. The perfect love story he'd believed in was nothing more than a stage play, and he was the unwitting audience of a tragedy. "Get out," Michael said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. Sarah gasped, her eyes widening. "Michael, please, don't do this. I told you I was trapped. I tried to stop her." "You enabled her," he corrected, his voice rising slightly, a tremor of the raw pain beneath his controlled exterior. "You let her into my life. You let her pretend to be the woman I fell in love with. You let her take pieces of my life, piece by piece, and turn them into her own twisted fantasy. I don't know which one of you I'm talking to half the time, and I don't care anymore. Just go." He pointed towards the door, his hand shaking with a silent fury. Sarah hesitated, her face contorted in a mask of despair. She wanted to argue, to plead, but the look in Michael's eyes was absolute. It was a cold, impenetrable wall he had built around himself, protecting the last vestiges of his sanity. With a final, choked sob, she turned and fled, disappearing into the rainy morning. Michael stood there for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in on him, heavier than ever before. The grand, beautiful home felt like a tomb. He walked numbly through the rooms, picking up photos of Sarah, her smile radiant, her eyes sparkling. Which Sarah was that? The real one? The one he loved? Or the phantom, Catherine, who had stolen moments, memories, emotions? He couldn't tell anymore. The distinction had blurred, erased by the insidious deceit. He felt like a stranger in his own life, haunted by a ghost with a familiar face. He contacted the police, but the story was so bizarre, so convoluted, that they struggled to make sense of it. A twin sister pretending to be her? Without concrete evidence beyond his word and vague anomalies, it was difficult to pursue. He showed them the notes, the conflicting stories, but it sounded like the ramblings of a man consumed by paranoia. They suggested counseling, a break from stress. He couldn't blame them. Even he struggled to believe the nightmare he was living. Catherine, the master manipulator, vanished. She left no trace, no forwarding address, no digital footprint. It was as if she had dissolved back into the shadows from which she emerged, leaving behind only the wreckage of Michael's life. Sarah, after that day, never contacted him again. He heard through mutual acquaintances that she had left town, perhaps to escape the shame, or perhaps to simply start over, away from the ghost of her own past and the shadow of her twin. Michael's world, once so meticulously structured, lay in ruins. He lost his focus at work, his designs lacking the precision and creativity that had defined his career. His friends tried to reach out, but he pushed them away, unable to articulate the unspeakable betrayal he had endured. How do you explain to someone that you unknowingly dated two people at once, and one of them was a phantom, a living lie? The joy, the passion, the profound connection he had felt, they were all poisoned, tainted by the knowledge that half of it might not have been real. The trauma settled deep within him, leaving an indelible scar far worse than any physical mark. He found it impossible to trust again. Every new acquaintance, every potential connection, was met with a wall of suspicion. He saw Catherine's eyes in strangers, heard Sarah's voice in fleeting conversations. The world became a place of shadows and illusions, where nothing was truly what it seemed. Years passed, but the echoes of the deception lingered. Michael moved to a smaller apartment, unable to bear the memories that permeated the grand house. He continued his work, but the spark was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost resigned proficiency. He lived a solitary life, haunted by the memory of a love that was a meticulously crafted lie, by the face of a woman who was both his greatest joy and his deepest torment. Sometimes, late at night, a faint scent of lilies would waft through his open window, or he would hear a particular song on the radio that Sarah or Catherine had loved. And in those moments, a chilling question would surface, a final, insidious twist of the knife. Was there ever one Sarah? Or had he, from the very beginning, unknowingly fallen in love with an elaborate, tragic dance between two souls, one desperate for freedom, the other for belonging, both using him as their unwitting stage? The answer, he knew, would forever remain elusive, a haunting whisper in the empty chambers of his heart. This story, friends, is a chilling reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and the secrets people keep can be far more complex and far more devastating than we could ever imagine. It's a tale of love, betrayal, and the terrifying depths of human deception. If you found yourself gripped by Michael's story, if your heart pounded with every twist and turn, please give this video a like. Your support truly helps us bring these unique and compelling narratives to light. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true crime and mysterious stories that will leave you questioning everything. And be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember, not everything is as it seems.